Okay, hi, I'm Riley.
And I'm Hannah.
Today we're going to be talking about the scientific article, Music Attenuates Excessive Visual Guidance of Skilled Reaching in Advanced but Not Mild Parkinson's Disease.
First, a little bit of background information. Parkinson's disease is a very common disease that affects many people, especially as they age. It is characterized by motor and sensory impairments and progressive degeneration of dopamine-producing neurons in the brain. So it's usually accompanied with a lot of shaking and muscle or movement impairment. The movement impairment has been shown to improve under sensory cueing in Parkinson's patients. So this study investigates how music can serve as a sensory cue in reaching tasks.
So the methods and materials, the subjects for this consisted of mild Parkinson's patients and advanced Parkinson's patients. There was also two control groups, one of age-matched old adults and one of young adults. This is kind of just a graph that depicts the different Parkinson's subjects that took place. So ages range from about 50 to 84. There's both male and female, and then the Hone and Yar graph is a scale of how advanced their Parkinson's disease was. They were allowed to be on medications during this trial because it was determined that it did not, medication did not affect their reaching tasks that took place.
The study used a reaching task to measure the movement, and so the way the reaching task was defined was that participants were seated in a chair and they had to reach in front of them for a small food item that was placed on a pedestal. They used Cheerios in this study. The height and the distance from the pedestal from the patient was adjusted proportionally for each participant. So it was 100% of the arm distance out and at a proportional height, so it was a comfortable but full length reach for each participant. It was measured using biomechanical markers, which are these reflective dots that were placed on the participant to measure the movement, the speed, and the fluidity of the movement of the reaching task. It was also measured using eye tracking glasses, which were infrared scanners glasses that the people wore to track their eye movement, and also a movement element score, which consisted of 8 different elements of movement, and the scores were given you were given a 1 if the movement was completely absent, a 0.5 if the movement was present but abnormal, and a 0 if the movement was present and normal. So the lower score meant you had a better or more fluid movement, and a higher score was a slower or not any movement at all. The reaching task was performed with both normally with vision occlusion, where they were wearing goggles that could filter light in and out, and with preferred musical pieces that were chosen from each subject's favorite artist.
So there were 3 kind of sub-experiments in this one experiment. The first experiment was a skilled reaching with eye tracking. So here basically the subjects just did 10 trials of the reaching tasks. They did get a few practice trials too that didn't count for anything, but after that there were 10 trials that were monitored by all of the devices we just talked about. The second experiment was the skilled reaching task with visual occlusion. So here subjects completed 10 trials where they had visual impairments and 10 trials where they didn't. This was completely randomized, so subjects were not able to predict if they would be visually impaired or not. The third experiment was a skilled reaching with the preferred musical pieces, so this is where their 2 pieces of music that they chose came into play. The subjects here completed 10 trials of the reaching task without music and then trials with the music. This was not randomized because the experimenters figured there would be some sort of carryover effect if they were switching back and forth between the musical preferences and the non-musical preferences.
For experiment 1, the results were pretty normal or as expected. The biomechanical measurements suggested that the reaching movement slowed in regards to age and Parkinson's disease, which is pretty expected. So the patients with the more advanced Parkinson's had the highest or the slowest moving, and the young adult control groups had the fastest or more normal movement. The eye tracking showed that all of the subjects visually fixated on the item prior to grabbing it when they initiated the advanced phase of the reach, which is before they actually grabbed the food item, and then disengaged with the food item after they grabbed it in all groups except for the advanced Parkinson's patients, who continued to remain visually fixated on the item until it came into their mouth.
So these are just kind of some graphs explaining the results from experiment 1. This is all of the subjects. So we have the young adult control here, the old adult control, mild Parkinson's patients, and advanced Parkinson's patients. And what this is kind of showing is just that patients with advanced Parkinson's did take significantly longer to reach out, grab a Cheerio and put it in their mouth. This right here is all the movement scores. So as we said before, the 1 was when the movement was absent, the 0.5 was when it was present but abnormal, and the 0 was when it was present but normal. So this is also just saying, like, once again, advanced Parkinson's patients, their movement was usually either absent or present but abnormal.
This graph shows the relationship between the biomechanical measurements and the movement element scores. And so again, the lower scores were associated with a shorter reach duration, which the young adult and the old adult control groups had faster reaching scores and lower movement element scores. And the patients who had a higher movement element score are those who had the advanced or mild Parkinson's, but mostly advanced, and they took the longest to complete the reaching task.
So these are the results of the experiment 2. This is where the subjects were visually occluded. This kind of suggested that the advanced phase was slowed for all subjects, would make sense because they were visually impaired, so their advancing towards the Cheerio was slowed down because they couldn't see as well. The withdrawal phase was unaffected for all the groups excluding the advanced Parkinson's patients, who time slowed down for as well because as we mentioned before, when they were withdrawing, they were still fixated on the Cheerio, but they still couldn't see the Cheerio, so their withdrawal phase took longer than normal. These are just more charts explaining this. So again, the advanced Parkinson's disease took significantly longer than the other groups to engage, to move, and grasp and disengage. This is just comparing the vision, which is like the baseline, and then the occlusion. Again, saying that the advanced stage took longer than when you were occluded than it did when you were unoccluded.
This is another graph showing the relationship between the time and the biomechanical measurement and the movement element scores. And while all of them increased slightly because they could not see, so their movement element score did increase a little, those with the advanced Parkinson's and some mild Parkinson's were affected more, and their reach duration was longer, and their movement element score was also higher.
So the results for experiment 3, where the preferred music came into play, the biomechanical measurements for skilled reaching with music had no effect on the speed of the reaching movement. The eye tracking measurement suggested that music had no effect on musical guidance for either control group or the mild Parkinson's patients. For the advanced Parkinson's group, time between visual fixation and the reaching movement decreased. So this is basically saying normally before they had to fixate on the Cheerio longer than the other groups before they actually advanced towards the Cheerio, but when the music was present they didn't fixate on the Cheerio for as long, so it actually had positive effects on the advanced Parkinson's patients. This kind of suggests that their eye engagement was also normalized.
Here's the graph kind of showing what she just said. The time for the withdrawal is longer for all the advanced patients, but when they were doing it with the music, the time is less than it was without music between the engage to move, so they had to fixate on the Cheerio for less amount of time than they did with or without music, and with the visual occlusion.
This is kind of just going off the graphs that we just looked at too. So the total reach duration across the board was not very significant until you look at the total engagement duration. Here, the advanced Parkinson's patients, their total engagement duration decreased when the music was present.
This was really one of the first descriptions and studies on how music affected a skilled reaching task in Parkinson's patients. So while it was expected that the advanced Parkinson's patients would be more impaired than all of the other groups, it did show that the music did help them slightly. In the absence of vision, all of the groups were impaired, which was expected, but the advanced Parkinson's patients were additionally impaired, as opposed to all of the other groups who were only slightly impaired. The study did adapt 3 different kinds of measurements, so it's a good way to base further studies on how to measure movement and how movement can be scored and things like that. So this investigation opens to a lot of larger studies with bigger groups and more Parkinson's patients on how visual and musical effects can affect task performance or movement ability in Parkinson's patients.
Thank you.
Thank you.